Oh, it's sort of indirect. And I like to think about the background almost as the subconscious of the composition, in a sense that we don't really give it much sort of direct thought, but it is so powerful as an agent of communicating the whole sort of scenario, the whole composition. So I started this just an hour or so ago, just to have a block-in ready for this talk, but also because I love to paint, so that's great. It gives an opportunity to do that. And this is a composition that has sort of been on my mind for a long time. I'm using photographic reference here, but I'm just focusing the camera on the palette and the painting. So I thought I'd share with you my thought process so far, and then start the mixing process for the color and the values. And I'd also like to discuss some of my thoughts about the strategy that I employ as I am creating the foundation of the painting. This is often a very confusing stage for students because there is so much that has to be juggled. One have to consider elements of drawing and shapes and proportions and gesture and the relationship between shadow and light. And one also have to juggle the element of value. And of course, in the context of paint, we also have the element of color and paint, color and temperature and chroma to consider. So for that reason, it can be sometimes helpful to start the building process of the portrait without so much color, so that one can just focus on finding the gesture and proportion and the design of the composition. So that is what I have done so far. So
can you tell us what you did for your underpainting, what color you used, and did you use a thin wash with turpentine, or what did you do?
Exactly. So I just used a little mixture here of raw umber and the Venetian red that I have right here. So they were kind of hanging out over here. So mixing them together creates this slightly pink earth brown, which is quite nice because the imprimatura, which is the stain, represents or is quite proximate to her temperature of the light shape. So I often will select a stain on the canvas that corresponds closely to the light shape of the portraiture, because this is really the heart of the painting and where the elements of color, value, and modeling is very complex. So therefore, starting out with something that represents this area helps to, in a way, expedite the early stages of the painting process. And then this is probably mostly raw umber that I just scumbled in right here.
And is it fairly wet still?
Yes, it is. It's completely wet. So I sometimes use the Q-tips to scrape away. Excuse me. Scrape away the paint. So this is just applied today. And then everything on the portrait is still wet.
So did you do a lot of the painting by taking away as you're creating the whites or the high key values on the face? Was that wipeout?
Yeah, it's a combination. So of course, where we see these darker values sort of here is sort of where I added a little bit of paint, and then I do kind of go in here and wipe out exactly and sort of remove the wet paint with sort of a bundle of Q-tips to just help reveal a little bit of the light shape.
All right.
But there's
I'm going to try not to interrupt you. I'll keep you talking, but once in a while there will be a question from the audience or a comment. And we have someone watching now from Latvia. That's new. Welcome, Latvia. All right, we'll let you get started.
Okay. Excuse me. So do I continue now?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
All right. So I'll just talk about the colors that I have here, which is ivory black, and I have ultramarine violet here, cobalt blue, and I will get back to why I selected those colors. And then I have raw umber, alizarin crimson, cadmium red, yellow ochre. I have two cadmiums here. It's just regular cadmium which is quite warm. And then I have a cadmium lemon yellow, which is quite cool. And then, of course, I have white. And I do change the colors on my palette relative to the colors of the composition. And in this composition, she is wearing this turquoise robe. And so for that, I think that having a cooler yellow on the palette is going to be really helpful.
What kind of white are you using?
I use lead white. I have given titanium white a chance, but I gave up on it.
Well, it's not very, the lead white is so much more transparent.
Yes, but I also like the drying property of it, and I like the texture of it, and I just find it to be a very sort of predictable color to tint other colors with, precisely because it's a little bit more transparent than titanium white. But I do think it's important to mention that if somebody is starting out painting in oil, that, you know, if they still are quite messy, then I think it's maybe better to start off with titanium white before going on to lead white, because it is a toxic pigment and it needs to be kind of respected during the painting process.
Yeah, you got to be careful.
Yeah, but that is also true for some of the cadmium colors here.
Yep.
Yeah, so now this portrait is at this midpoint stage where I have, in a way, the composition in place, the gesture and proportions are answered, the relationship between the shadow and the light is working, and I have started to hint at the value key, in a way, within the portrait. I haven't expanded the value scale completely, but I started to go into the darkest notes of her eyes, for example, and also the shadow around the nose and the mouth. So I have already some relationship between the darkest notes and the lightest notes, as indicated in these lighter passages of the imprimatura. But what I wanted to do now is actually just to go through the mixing process in preparation for adding color and value to the portrait. And I'm going to demonstrate a fairly direct painting approach. So I'll start with some of the darkest areas. So now I'm just mixing ivory black and a little bit of alizarin crimson. And so that gives a sort of nice and dark, kind of reddish black, which would be good for some of the shadow shape areas and some of the darkest accents of the portrait. And then I go one step lighter, where I might start to increase the ratio of red. Maybe I'll go a little bit lighter with the cadmium red as well. So you can immediately see an impact right here, where this begins to lighten up the value just by using a primary color. And I will mix my color and my values relative to the composition, but very often one do see the same or similar color values kind of being expressed in most compositions. So especially some of these base notes right here, with some of the darkest color values, that's pretty much just going to be straight up black and red in most compositions that will have a shadow shape. Okay. And let me know if you have any questions along the way.
One of the questions is, where on earth do you get lead white in Norway?
Yeah, you have to import it. And so we just recently moved to Norway, actually just in July. And so we stocked up. Yeah, so I won't be able to give any advice on that. It is it's a complicated situation for professional painters in Europe, that lead white is becoming very difficult to obtain.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I was at Dan Graves' studio, and he has big bags he mixes his own lead white, and said he had to buy a bunch because he's afraid that he may never be able to get it again.
Yes, yeah, exactly. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Hello, New Zealand. Hello, Germany.
Hello. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in and seeing this mixing process right here. I really appreciate it. So now that I start to go a little bit lighter, I start to introduce a little bit of white, and I actually have just these mixtures right here. They're just black and red and a little bit of ochre, but I feel that now I can start to introduce a little bit of white. So if you do find that you have a composition where there's a lot of very rich midtones, for example, it's important to consider that before you go to white to make a lighter value, you can first do that by kind of going through ochre and a combination of red. Because if we only mix white and black, let's say, we will get a very chalky color. Well, in a way, this is kind of chalky right here, but in the context of color and values, they're also quite chromatic and rich. You know, they play off each other. But if everything is sort of mixed black and white, it can kind of create a bit of a gray, chalky appearance to the composition. So in order to obtain and to preserve the color integrity, you can also maneuver on the value scale by just using kind of pure color instead of black and white.
Okay. I'm going to keep you on target with timing, just so you're aware you've got about 25 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
So I know time goes by real quickly.
It sure does. It sure does. And I will certainly not be finishing even this process today, but I'll just be sort of introducing some color notes to the painting. And I'm also planning to go into the background, actually. So while I'm mixing these this color value string right here, you know, this is for the portrait in a way. So this is going to be a mid-tone somewhere around here. But you can see that even as I'm putting my palette knife up here, that it's very difficult to judge the relative light of this mixture. And that is because we don't yet have the context of as presented with the background and her hair. So I just want to show you, in a way, the strategy of building a painting in the early stages and what is important to address early on. So there is, in a way, a synergy that happens between the components of the composition. So we constantly have to juggle the element of drawing as pertains to sort of the accuracy of design. And we have to use value also to express structure and you know, the way that the form turns towards the light or, you know, towards the shadow. So value is an essential component to conveying the structure of the three-dimensional form, since value is in a way, side effect of the planes turning with the relative degrees to the light.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so here I have just sort of a, well, fairly complex flesh tint scale. So here are sort of the shadow shape, midtones, and some sort of cool and warm midtones. And then here we have some a variation of warm and cool lighter values.
Are you using a glass palette and did you tone it with paint, or is that paper behind it? What is it?
No, this is actually a wood palette.
Oh, it is. Okay, so it's a piece of masonite or something like that.
No, just birchwood.
Just wood. Okay.
Yeah, right. It's from New Wave art palettes.
Ah, they make great products.
They do. They do. I love them. All right, so now I'm going to go into the background. And the background has some, it's a yellow background right here, but there's also some shadow right here. And so it's almost straight up going to be ochre in some elements of the background. So I'll just create a little patch right there. I also like to create a little patch maybe where I have some of the darkest accents. And so this becomes what I refer to sometimes as the ugly duckling stage of the painting process, where it looks a little bit broken and maybe that I have some kind of color samples sort of distributed throughout the composition. But this is a really wonderful way, an effective way of judging your color and your values before you commit to fleshing them out across the painting process, because it's possible to assess the relative, degree of how close or how far away a color and a value is relative to its destination. So as I'm looking at this to the composition, I know that I'm going to have to go a little bit darker right there. rather than going to black immediately, I'm actually just going to mix the ochre and the umber, because this is a little bit more in a proximate color family than the ochre and black. Black is quite interesting, I think, as a color, because it represents the darkest value on the value spectrum, but it also represents blue in a way. So when black is mixed with white, for example, we get a kind of earthy blue color. So when I mix it, if I were to mix black and ochre right here, it would probably turn a little bit more green. But even so, I'm actually mitigating this mixture with a little bit of red as well, and also a little bit of cadmium, because I needed to spruce up the chroma right here. So you can see it's actually not too far off the original ochre color, but it's a little bit darker and it's still nice and chromatic.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I'm just going to see that somewhere around here. I'd also like to just create some initial mixtures for the blouse that she's wearing. And that's a nice turquoise. And this is more green than I need in a way. That's very, very colorful.
Did you end up, did you do color charts when you were kind of learning to mix color?
I did. There was this weekend workshop done by Carlos Madrid that I took, and that was extremely valuable because then we just sat down and we mixed colors and created a very kind of complex color mandala, essentially. And this is something I absolutely recommend to do in one way or another, just to sit down and become very comfortable with the mixing process. Because it's a bit like bicycling, where initially one may have to think about each step of the way, but eventually mixing color and values can become very intuitive. So it's going here with black, and I find some of these darker.
What kind of black are you using?
I'm using ivory black.
Okay.
Sometimes I actually use a bit of Mars black in the blocking stage as well.
And are you making your own paint, or are you using tube paint from somebody?
I use tube paints.
Okay.
Yeah, from a mixture of brands. So there's some Old Holland, Michael Harding, and the Rublev color.
Mm-hmm. All good paints.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so now I'm just going to start to block in the background a little bit. Yeah.
Are you going to be using any medium? What are you doing?
So I use very little medium. I'm quite conservative when it comes to medium concoctions. And I think that's also really important for especially students of painting to kind of start with the basics. So maybe rather than going to very complex medium concoctions, select something like just linseed oil. Since paint is just made of pigment and linseed oil or walnut oil, traditionally. So that's what I use. I just use walnut oil or linseed oil. And I'm not adventurous at all when it comes to mediums, just because I'm not a chemist and I feel like I would need to know the chemistry of it in order to want to incorporate something other than oil.
Well, the paintings that have lasted the longest historically were just done with linseed oil.
Yeah, correct. But it's also maybe so that so oil paintings, in the past were used, or the mediums that we used were walnut oil or linseed oil.
Yeah.
Maybe not very complicated concoctions.
And you find it's important to get your background in first so that you can read the values on the face?
Exactly. So the moment the background comes in here, and also if I bring in a little bit of the hair, pardon me, So I'm just going to use pure black here. I took another brush just because I needed to make sure that this is completely clean so I can obtain a nice dark value here. And this is fused a little bit with the raw umber that is still wet in these areas.
Mm-hmm.
So on the second round, on the second painting day, I'll be probably able to go even darker in these areas.
Do you do a lot of glazing in your process?
No, rarely,
No.
rarely.
So everything is direct painting, paint over paint.
Yeah, pretty much. I think there are some things, some results that can, really only be obtained with glazing. So it's an interesting technique to be aware of and to know of as well. But in the process of at least learning painting, I think just exercising direct painting techniques are really helpful because it forces you to identify what the color and value actually is.
Mm-hmm.
Right now,
what are your surfaces? What are you painting on?
this is a linen canvas that is adhered to birchwood panel.
Okay.
And this is made by New Traditions art panels.
Mm-hmm.
I like that combination a lot because you have, in a way, the benefit of both worlds in that one have the texture of the canvas and one have the sort of solid structural support of the birchwood panel.
Mm-hmm.
And so if one were to get injured over time, let's say if the birchwood were to get warped over time, there would be some, a restorer could potentially find a solution to, saving the artwork. Yeah.
Okay. Heard about the 15-minute mark.
Okay. Sounds good. All right, this is a bit of a rush job right here. So certainly I'm going to be posting this painting when it's moved forward a bit from this stage.
Yeah, if you'll post it in the comments on this broadcast, that way everybody will see it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll do that. And then I will also...
Notice, everyone, how the values really pop once that dark goes against that light.
Isn't that amazing? I just find that such a thrilling moment of the painting.
Yeah.
And I also just wanted to show you this early stage of the painting process, just because there's so many moving parts then. There's so much happening early on. And so it also becomes a very satisfying stage, I think, of the painting process, which is quite exhilarating. It's also one of my favorite stages of painting is also refining, when the painting and the portrait really comes to life. And I really enjoy sort of working with the subtlety of transitions surrounding the features, because so much of the expressions and the emotions is sort of rooted in these areas, such as the eyebrows, for example, of course, the corners of the mouth. There is so much of the emotions expressed sort of in these areas.
So did you have a live model pose for this photograph that you're working from?
Yeah, for the photograph. Yeah, for the photo session. So I only work with compositions that I have composed, unless I'm working from commission. Then sometimes there will be other sort of photographic references. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you ever paint from live models, or do you try to bring them in? Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Although these days that's hard.
Oh yeah. Well, that's right. We've all been forced to try new things.
Find other solutions. Yeah.
Well, it's great to learn how to do it from photos as well, because obviously doing from life is the great way. But sometimes we don't have access to models, or we don't have the money for them, or whatever. So
that's exactly it. And I think it's really important to be solution oriented. And I think it's nice to be able to paint from life. But as you say, it's not always possible, budget wise, time wise, or right now, of course, obviously we want to avoid mingling with large groups of people. So maybe, of course, painting family members, if that's a possibility, or oneself, of course, painting a self-portrait, because that's always a
We're
reliable
doing
model.
a self-portrait competition right now. So,
Fantastic.
what kind of brush are you using? Is it a hog's hair?
So I use a combination of brushes. So right here I have a Escoda brush. No, this is not Escoda. This is something else.
Yeah, that looks like a Russian brush.
Yeah, Raphael.
Oh, okay.
All right. I don't know where I picked up that one. So this is a hog hair brush. And then I have, this is rosemary. No, this is also Raphael. Okay, no, I just grabbed them here. And then I have, this is also Raphael. Okay, so I guess a bunch of these are Raphael. I didn't actually know that. They were the same brand.
Now you know.
Now I know. And I also really like the Escoda brushes. This is the Graphilo series, and this is Red Sable. But I would use a mixture. Usually I would use more hog hair bristle brushes in the early stages of the painting, because it's more convenient to, I think, add paint with bristle brushes. Whereas like a really soft sable hair brush is not going to do a whole lot. Let's see if I just, for comparison, it barely brings the paint onto the canvas, whereas this bristle brush will do so quite sort of eagerly. So I prefer to use bristle brushes overall, like when in the early stages of the painting, when adding paint to the surface, or if I want to build up texture in a certain area. Bristle brushes tend to want to do that with a little bit more ease, I think, than sable hair brushes. But when it comes to modeling the form and the features, especially when I'm working with halftones, like in this area later on, then I really do like to go down in scale in terms of the scale of the brush, the size of the brush, and also you work with sable hair brushes, because then it can build a really nice and sort of even transition where that is desired.
Okay. So your basic process is you're going to get the background and then the clothing done before you work on the face. Is that typically right?
Yeah. So I will say, though, that there are many different sort of entry points into the sort of painting journey. But overall, it's about establishing context for the different elements to kind of work together. So now, just to sort of synopsize, I had to have some reference of her, the composition, in place before I could bring in any element of the background. Otherwise, the background wouldn't know where to go.
Oh, you're saying creating the air by bringing some background color into the face.
Yeah, in a way. So first the first step was just to situate her, and now bringing in the background and the some element of the foreground right here helps to create the context for the portrait. And maybe before elaborating sort of more on this area, maybe I'll go back into the portrait. That depends a little bit. But what's important in terms of strategizing which areas to work on, and in a way why, it's about the building blocks of the painting process in a way. So you need to have some sense of where the figure is going to be, or the portrait is going to be, in order to know where these big blocks of color values are going to be situated. And then I needed to have the background in place and some color notes on her garment in order to now establish the context for the portrait.
Yeah, I'm afraid we're going to run out of time. I want to see you do a little skin.
Yeah. Well, you might be able to see it at some point, because I am filming this on another camera, and so this portrait will eventually be featured on my Patreon platform, which is Cornelia Hernes artwork on Patreon. So this will be eventually available there. And I'll also tend to make faster little video clips with time lapses of my painting process, which you can see on Instagram, which is Cornelia Hernes artwork. And also on YouTube, you can also find some sort of painting synopsis in those locations. This is a bit of a rough beginning here. I know I have a lot to organize, especially in this area, but I think I got quite close to the color destination in this area. Looking forward to continuing this process forward.
Okay, we've got about 5 minutes.
Okay, so let's see what we can do. Do you have any questions?
No, I'm going to let you paint right now. No questions.
Okay.
Daniela Rochsledge says to say hello to you.
Oh, hi, Daniela. How are you? She's a friend, a teacher in Florence. And she's actually my teacher for a while.
Oh, good.
She's a fantastic artist.
Okay, I've not met her. I know Daniela Estoni over there.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, I have a painting brain now. You have to forgive me. No, Daniela Rafte, she is a student in Sweden. Daniela Estoni, of course. Now I kind of blurred my mind there. Okay. Thank you for correcting me.
Oh, I wasn't trying to correct you. I just thought maybe there were two Danielas.
Yeah. I'm not very good at remembering surnames or names, but I always remember faces and people.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of my goals one day is to go over and study at Florence Academy.
Yeah, yeah.
Now that my kids are gone, maybe I'll make that happen. I'd have to do this. It'd be 8 o'clock. What time is it there in Norway?
It's closing in on 7.
Okay. So I'd have to do my broadcast at 6 o'clock every night.
Yeah, yeah. Which is quite nice too. Yeah.
Okay. I'm moving.
Yes. Yeah, I recommend it. It's really nice. So I just wanted to bring your attention to this area now, because you can really see how blue black wants to be, even when it's mixed with ochre. And so I keep pouring in a red right here, actually, just to counterbalance that tendency, so that I don't cool down that area too much, but maintain a nice sort of ochre transition. And I know that I can still bring in more red in this transition, actually, which may seem not quite contradictory, maybe, but it seems like a different color destination than the yellow.
Did you say that's Venetian red?
What I have right here is a cadmium red. The Venetian red I haven't really been using for the background, just because it's a little bit too earthy. So in order to express nice sort of color saturation for this particular background, I'm sticking to ochre as a base color. And then, of course, I have black right here. And then I'm using more the cadmium colors, cadmium red and cadmium yellow, to obtain a nice sort of rich color saturation in this area. I feel like I need to bring in a little bit more of a dark kind of, dark red, basically, right here.
So you're going to post the completed work on this Facebook page when you're done, if you would.
Yes.
And so people are asking about that. Also, you'll be able to see more. She will do this as a tutorial at Cornelia Hernes art.com. Is that right?
Cornelia Hernes artwork, and that would be Patreon. So it's Patreon / Cornelia Hernes artwork. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, Patreon. Okay.
Yeah. And
But I've posted her website on there, but you can also look up her name on Patreon.
Yes, thank you. And it might take a couple of sessions before this is complete, but I will post some updates of the process, and it will also be updated on the Instagram. Yeah.
Okay. Excellent.
All right.
All right. We're coming down to about 2 or 3 minutes, so no pressure.
No.
And by the way, it's really beautiful. Just seeing the underpainting. It's just so gorgeous.
Yeah, thank you. I do really like this stage a lot, and it's. I think sometimes that can be a sort of own statement also.
I think it's also really important to see how much attention you're paying to the background, because that's influencing the portrait itself. I think so many of us tend to just kind of put our backgrounds in haphazardly, and you're putting a lot of care to it, which is teaching me lessons.
All right, that's great. It's really quite amazing how it's sort of indirect. And I like to think about the background almost as the subconscious of the composition, in a sense that we don't really give it much sort of direct thought, but it is so powerful as an agent of communicating the whole sort of scenario, the whole composition. So I haven't made a single brush strokes during this painting session or during our talk within the portrait, yet the whole composition has changed tremendously.
Yes.
Just by making sure that the background is working. And I think also with something like this, I really like it when there is a bit of shadow or value variations in the background. So it's not completely plain, but that creates a nice sort of element of lost and found edges in this area right here.
Yeah.
And I'm also making sure to create a soft sequence of transitions right there, so I avoid any sharp edges of the background.
So when you start on the face, where would you start? Would you start with the shadows?
Yes, because in this situation, I have the imprimatura that's the closest to her light shape. And so the shadow then are the elements that needs to just make sure that they are in their correct location. And they are actually quite close to their final destination, because I did go in here and start to sort of introduce some of the color values in these darker areas. I'm not able to go maybe quite as dark in the shadow shape here yet. Maybe it'll be closer to this a little bit. And that's
I'm going to have to
yeah.
ask you to stop painting and come back on camera so we can say goodbye. I apologize to everyone. I would try to go long if I could, but we're going to get cut off on some platforms very quickly. And unfortunately, we've kind of run out of time. But this has been a fabulous exercise already. So I really appreciate this, Cornelia. I'm going to switch over to the other camera once you're on there.
I'll see you there. Okay.
All right. And so in the meantime, I'm coming back on. I want to thank Cornelia Hernes, and she's going to be live on Realism Live, which is coming up October 20 through 24. There's a beginner's day, and then there's 4 days of things like this in depth, and we'll be able to see it. So here she is. There he is. And there she is, in case you didn't get a chance to see her at the beginning of the show. Cornelia, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
You'll post this so we can see it, and then we'll get a chance to see the finished product. Obviously, we can also go to Patreon, look up your name, Cornelia Hernes, and that will help us as well. So thank you for being on the show today, and I'm coming to Norway to see you guys.
Sounds great. Looking forward to it. Then thank you so much for everyone tuning in. Appreciate it.
All right.